We are talking Warren Roberson, Duce Robinson, and more on today's episode of Locked On Longhorns.
You are Locked On Longhorns, your daily podcast on the Texas Longhorns. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked On Longhorns, the show. Jonathan Davis, your host. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/Locked On today to get started. Your favorite college football recruiting analyst, John Garcia Jr., joining the show once again. Warren Roberson, the latest player to commit to the Texas Longhorns 2023 class. And John, I know you love your DBs. Before we talk about Warren Roberson, I believe one of the main reasons that he decommitted from TCU and committed to the 40 acres is that the TCU Horned Frogs took 5 safeties in one class. In your experience, is that normal? Like, is that something that schools do, take 5 safeties in one class? I appreciate them for it.
Yeah, that's a lot. Obviously, look, there's a business element to making these decisions. And naturally, if you are put in that safety box, and look, he belongs there, he's big, physical player, two-way guy. But look, he's going to be a safety. I think that's pretty clear at this point. So, yeah, I do think when the road is that crowded, let's say, it does make it a little bit harder. And I also think, look, Texas made a really nice play here later in the game for him. They got the last official visit. Arch Manning was on the case. I mean, this was one of those that became an expectation, and when a flip becomes an expectation, it means there's a lot of things at play. And oftentimes there's a little bit of push on both sides of that coin. So I think bringing in so many guys at the position certainly could have contributed.
And look, it's Texas, man. I know we didn't beat TCU. I know we didn't make it to the national championship game, but if we did, we wouldn't have lost by 50, right? So look, John, all right, let's talk about Warren Roberson. Committed to the 40 acres, chose Texas over TCU and Lincoln Riley and USC. What do you like about the Red Oak product at the safety position?
I like his floor, JD. This is a kid who physically, instinctually, technically is kind of there now. We talk so much about what these kids will develop into and how much room they have to improve, but there's something to be said for the floor. If a kid who's physically there, 6'2", over 200 pounds, I mean, look on his Twitter. I mean, this is a kid who looks like a grown man already. So I think all of those departments, those boxes are checked. And then you go check the tape, and this is a guy on Friday nights who lines up everywhere: corner, safety, receiver, running back, plays special teams, key roles on special teams, not just, in the return game or the coverage units, but he's on the hands team. I mean, this is a guy who has built trust in his own high school program. And I do put a lot of cachet in that. Those players are just closer to contributing on Saturdays mentally. And again, physically, he's already there. Probably not elite at any one thing, but he's got B+, A- across the board, whether it's ball skills, physicality, tracking the football, closing speed, the ability to win at the point of contact. I think Warren's got a lot of those boxes checked, and he's one that when he can now focus on one position, because he played a lot of offense in high school, I do think that can help him get over the hump in certain categories, like refining his back pedal and becoming a little bit more technically savvy as a secondary only player. But again, the instincts, the overall football IQ are all there, just like the physicality and the frame is there from a college standpoint. So I like the floor here. I think he's one that is going to see the field sooner rather than later and comes to Texas as a near finished product, as opposed to one that has to change so many things to assimilate to the collegiate game. So I think it's a nice way for Texas to round out the secondary. It's always sweet when you flip an in-state recruit from a rival in the conference who's theoretically on top at this point. But I think it hits even more when you think that he's going to see the field sooner, so you don't have to wait to see how the development goes in between.
Yeah, and that safety room at Texas is quietly becoming a very deep room with a lot of talent. Let's talk Duce Robinson, the number 1 tight end in the country. I'm not sure if he's the highest rated unsigned or uncommitted player at this point, but he's definitely up there, right?
Yeah.
So it seems, really modern tight end. Everything I've seen from him, he looks like a future superstar, right? And he's likely choosing between Texas, USC, and Georgia at this point. But I want to ask you, because they all provide interesting things for Duce Robinson at the next level, right? So if you were somebody advising Duce Robinson, would you suggest USC, who probably has the best offensive mind of the three schools in Lincoln Riley? We know that Duce Robinson is a two-sport athlete. He wants to play baseball. I believe Texas provides the best opportunity to compete at a high level in football and baseball. Or would you suggest Georgia, who's probably using the tight end position, his primary position in sport, better than anybody else in college football right now? So if you're somebody advising Duce Robinson, would you choose USC for the offensive mind in Lincoln Riley, the two-way ability in baseball and football at Texas, or go be a dominant tight end where they're showcasing their tight ends in a dominant fashion at the University of Georgia?
Yeah, he's got a heck of a trio to choose from, because you could make arguments for all three of those schools, right? Even geographically, he's right next to Texas. He's got ties to the West Coast, and he came up in Florida, where his dad played at Florida State. So you could really make a lot of different arguments for Duce. Personally, I would tell him, crush these spring showcases in baseball and go play baseball and be done with it. But from a college standpoint, look, I think you can make an argument for all three of these programs. The interesting thing about Texas and USC relative to Georgia is that they're selling Duce on, hey, be the reason why we use the tight end more. Be the reason why we're going to implement the tight end more, as opposed to where at Georgia, it's more of a, hey, we've been doing this, come be the next guy. And depending on the kid, you could sell one of those easier than the other. There's a lot of elite recruits that view something like that as a challenge. Hey, let me go be the reason why Caleb Williams starts throwing to a true freshman, or let me go follow the pipeline and be the next first rounder that's viewed as a bit of a layup because it's been so successful at this certain school. So it just depends on the type of football recruit Duce wants to be. But that's the thing, man. Baseball is going to play such a factor here. I mean, there's really no other way to point that out. I mean, it's the reason why he didn't sign on National Signing Day, and it's the reason why there's no real end date in sight. Like I said, there's some spring showcases that he's got to hit, and who knows what that does to his draft stock. And I think the conversation around his stock has stalled his college recruitment overall, much less which sport or which school. So it'll be fascinating, as multi-layered a recruitment as we've seen, period. But again, if I was advising him, I'd say, hey, look, college football is great, but go ahead and sign that major league contract. But look, Duce is saying he wants to go to college. And I think from that standpoint, Texas would be kind of a happy medium. You're going to have the spotlight. You're going to have the buzz there. You've got an opportunity as a true freshman to make an impact. Don't know if that exists at UGA with Brock Bowers coming back. I mean, he'll be the best returning tight end in college football, I think, unanimously at this point. And USC hasn't really shown it, so I think it depends on what that internal desire is for Duce. USC had the early buzz. Georgia had the late buzz. Texas has kind of hung around in this recruitment. So again, you could start to sell that thing one of three ways, and Oregon's trying to get a visit, so that thing, depending on the timeline, can go a number of directions, and you could sort of see why he's in a great position at this point to make this final call.
Yeah, whatever happens with Duce Robinson, let's not forget to mention JT Sanders at Texas. All right, he's no slouch, definitely at the tight end position. For sure. All right, so we're going to talk Bijan Robinson and Cedric Baxter next. Scheme fits and running styles. Going to be a very interesting conversation with John Garcia. This year, the only app you need at your Super Bowl party is FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. We are really excited about our new sports betting partner for Locked On, because they're the #1 sports book in America, FanDuel. And if you're new to FanDuel, that's even better. They have so many great features that make betting on sports fun and easy. Download FanDuel now so you can bet Super Bowl 57 with a no-sweat first bet. You'll get up to $3,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet does not win. FanDuel lets you bet on everything from the money line to point spreads to who will score a touchdown. The FanDuel Sportsbook app is safe, secure, and super easy to use. And best of all, you can get paid your winnings instantly. So join FanDuel today at FanDuel.com/lockedon to claim your no-sweat first bet on Super Bowl 57. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NFL. So, John, speaking of the NFL, Bijan Robinson is currently getting ready for the draft, where he'll be selected number 26 by the Dallas Cowboys. And
fingers crossed.
fingers crossed. And there's been a lot of conversation about, obviously, at this point, you would say Bijan Robinson is the more talented player than Cedric Baxter. Bijan Robinson probably does more things well than Cedric Baxter. But Cedric Baxter being a big, physical, decisive, one-cut runner, a lot of people have said he may be a better scheme fit for Steve Sarkisian and Kyle Flood's offense, right? That inside zone power run. He might be a better fit for this offense moving forward than Bijan Robinson was. And that sounds crazy, but you can make the argument that it's true, right? Yeah. So for somebody that's covered, both and seen both a hell of a lot, right? What do you think about that? Do you think there's a possibility that Cedric Baxter might be a better fit for this offense, a la Najee Harris, than Bijan Robinson was?
Well, look, I mean, Najee's kind of the comp that we've rolled with for quite some time here. So I do see where that argument stems from. But look, there's there's a big difference between proven and unproven. And said on top of the unknown from a transitional standpoint, high school to college. Look, Bijan Robinson, this is a historical great. This isn't just a recent great or the best back coming out this year, whatever we're labeling him in the short term. I think if you zoom out, this is one of the greatest players in Texas history. So whenever you're in that ballpark at that position, given, Ricky Williams and Cedric, Ced Benson and all these guys, Jamal Charles, that's a really big deal. So I'm a little early in making that proclamation. Now, that said, speaking of said, no pun intended, that said, I do think there's more of a room to grow for Baxter. It's the opposite of what we said about Warren Roberson earlier. Cedric Baxter's new to the running back position. He will be new to this type of scheme once he gets to Texas. Where he is most comfortable today is probably the third down package that Steve Sarkisian will roll out. Even though at 6'1", 6'2", 215, he might not look like he's most comfortable there. So the ability to improve is certainly going to be there, and there's more room for him to grow, as opposed to Bijan. The moment he got to Texas, everybody was like, hey, this is the guy, get him the ball. I mean, get him the ball more was really the only critique that folks were giving.
I was about to say everybody but Tom Herman, right?
Well, yeah, that's a story for another day. But with Cedric Baxter, there's more improvement as a running back to be made. And I think comparing him even to Najee Harris, who was that bell cow for 4 years in high school before he got to Bama, not the same deal for Baxter. So it's those intricacies that I do still think Ced has to improve upon. That was really the only knock before we named him the number one back in the summer. Everything else was roses for him. Everything else was, this is kind of the unanimous top back in the country. The only potential downside was the lack of experience, right? So whether it's making jump cuts, playing a little bit more patient, some of that instinctive stuff that Bijan was so darn good at, those are the elements where I think you'll see the biggest difference between the two. But that only exists now. You need to gain experience before some of that stuff comes along. So I do think down the line, you could make that argument that Baxter's a better fit because of his more decisive style. But in the short term, Bijan's vision, instincts, patience, and overall game are going to outweigh that of Baxter. And that is no knock to Cedric at all. I think he is, again, clearly the number one back in the country coming out, and he's going into a situation where he could be the number one back at Texas right out of the gate. So I do think it'll be interesting to compare and contrast these two going forward, but it's a little premature to say Baxter is for sure a better fit because he's only got 2 years of running back experience behind him. So it's hard to measure that up schematically regardless of the physical fit.
Yeah, once again, no knock on Cedric Baxter. It's just all praise for future Cowboy running back Bijan Robinson. Johntay Cook, somebody you covered and is explosive on the field and has an explosive personality. Throughout winter workouts, it's been said that he's expected to have a big role this year in a crowded wide receiver room. I mean, you're talking about A.D. Mitchell, Xavier Worthy, Jordan Whittington, Isaiah Nayor theoretically would be ahead of him on the depth chart right now. Does it surprise you at all that Johntay Cook is expected to have a big role this year in his true freshman season at the 40 acres?
Not at all. I mean, when you've got kind of an alpha competitive edge to you, it almost doesn't matter who else is there. And that doesn't mean he's going to be a wide receiver 1 and catch 100 balls, but that's the kind of player that Johntay's been presented as, and he's only lived up to it more and more as time has gone on. I mean, the focal point of DeSoto's offense, and they rode him to a state title, basically. So this is a guy who is commanding attention with his personality, but more than backing it up with his play, which has created that level of confidence that's really hard to shake, especially at that position, right? You're going to drop a ball, you're maybe going to fumble, run the wrong route, create an interception. There's so many avenues to where you could kind of go in the tank, and we see it across the sport, even at the highest of levels. But with a kid like Johntay Cook, you just don't expect it. So when you factor that into the physical skill set that is tailor-made for a spread, use the passing game as an extension of the running game kind of defense or kind of offense like Texas is going to utilize, it makes even more sense. You don't have to get sophisticated with the route tree, even though this is a top 5 route runner. If you get to that point, you can tell him, hey, line up here, turn around, we're going to throw it to you. And he's fine with that. You know, there's more. He plays bigger than he is. There's more physicality than his frame suggests. And I'm not sure, beyond Xavier Worthy's linear speed, I'm not sure anybody on that roster is currently better equipped for that style of extension of the running game. In the bubble screen, the quick screen, the tunnel screen game, you could argue that Johntay Cook is best suited for that right now compared to anybody on that roster. So, yeah, I think it's very apparent that his first impression will continue to grow, and we should expect him on the field because he fits in the margins as opposed to where we can kind of line up the other 4 receivers and say, yeah, this is where he fits, this is where he fits. Cook can blur those lines and fill multiple spots among these top 4 or 5 receivers, and I don't know, maybe beyond Worthy, if any of the others can do that.
Yeah, speaking of expectations, we've now seen the 2023 Big 12 schedules, even though Texas and Oklahoma won't acknowledge it for whatever reason. But we've seen the Texas schedule for 2023. A lot of people have said this is the year, right? Last year was the year before the year. It's year 3 for Steve Sarkisian. He's got his players in. The staff is settled in. We've seen the development. They're recruiting at an elite level. Now that you've seen the schedule, which in my opinion, no disrespect, it's kind of cake, very favorable for the Longhorns. What are your expectations for Texas this season?
Yeah, favorable in that you don't leave the state of Texas more than once until mid-November. So, yeah, very favorable, even just for the players in their headspace. This is something that's lining up very well. The Bama game's still going to be the indicator, right, for us. Last year, we saw such a valiant effort. My gosh. I mean, everything about that game screamed Texas is so close. And I think we saw more glimpses of that after that game went in the books in September. Now this year, it's the same kind of deal. That will be the measuring stick, and we will infer so much from that game. No disrespect to the Rice Owls, of course, coming to DKR.
JT Daniels.
Yeah, and JT Daniels coming in but before that trip to Tuscaloosa. But it's the same deal. And I think you could argue they're in a better position to handle Alabama this year, right? That young offensive line is a little bit older. You've portaled and recruited your way to a more balanced offensive and defensive roster. And now we know more about the competition that's going to go down at some of these important positions with spring ball still ahead. And conversely, Bama's going to be replacing one of the best quarterbacks to ever don that uniform in Bryce Young. And we know how much he compensated for on that roster that last year, let's be honest, didn't feel like a traditional Bama roster on offense. So I think all of those things are going to help Texas potentially close that gap. So that Bama game is going to be the measuring stick. And if it comes up well for UT, you could expect a whole lot of W's to fall in thereafter. And even if it doesn't work out in Tuscaloosa, I think 10 wins is kind of the number that I'm looking at. I think it would be a disappointment if it was a single-digit win season for Texas here going forward. And like you said, there's the perfect storm for this to brew up for Texas, right? There's pressure on Steve Sarkisian. There's maybe a quarterback battle, probably not, but there's going to be pressure on Quinn Ewers while all this skill position talent returns and the weaknesses of the roster maybe offensive line and edge are somewhat addressed in between. So this has to be the year. It's not, hey, it's the year before the year. This has to be the year, or folks are going to start asking a lot of questions about this Steve Sarkisian regime. So I think that is trending up for Texas because pressure is a good thing. It shouldn't be a scary situation. You should want that as a player, as a coach, as a program, because it creates that spotlight. And obviously that game is a spotlight in and of itself. So naturally, all eyeballs on Texas at Bama, and then things will fall in place thereafter. But I'm still looking at 10 wins and challenging for the Big 12 crown once again.
Yeah, so just for a little bit of clarification, I was saying that fans were saying 2022 was the year before the year, even though I think this season they could have made it to the Big 12 championship and won it. But that's neither here nor there. I think it's Big 12 championship or bust this year. I'm going to get you out on this. Nothing to do with Texas football at all, nothing to do with college at all. LeBron James is 36 points away from becoming the all-time leading scorer in NBA history, passing Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. He plays, well, not in the Staples Center, in the Crypt tonight against the Oklahoma City Thunder. He needs 36 points to become the all-time leading scorer. By the time my listeners hear this tomorrow, will LeBron be the all-time leading scorer in NBA history?
Yes, he's going for 40 against OKC. He'll get to the line if the shot's not falling, but I got the feeling it's going to fall anyway. So 40-point game on deck for King James. And look, just another milestone. We just saw Tom Brady walk away, and I think we take advantage of seeing that greatness. So let's appreciate it with LeBron while it's still going on. Doesn't mean I'm going to pick him for a different debate, but for tonight, give me LeBron 40 points, breaking the record, and give the man some flowers while we're at it.
Yeah, I think he'll break it too, but he does have the crutch of playing another home game on Thursday. So if he doesn't get it tonight, he can say, well, I'll just get it on Thursday. But hopefully he gets it tonight against the Thunder. I agree. I think he goes for 37 plus and breaks one of the hardest records to break all time in the history of sports. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Locked On Longhorns / Locked On Los Angeles Lakers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Hook 'em. Peace.